I didn't know I was dying, but I said, there's no air in here. There's no air in here. That's when I left my body. It caused me to shoot up in the air. I was flying straight up and I had a sense of Manhattan. When I got to the house, I had lost my body. All of us, my ancestors, had passed through this same doorway. I began to feel my ancestors as a presence just kind of around me to welcome me. People can't fly. Is this real? A voice answered me in my bones. It said, more real than anything back there. The sun got bigger and bigger, and I began to have a little bit of sense, am I going to vaporize? I became aware of a being. The being was holding me as if I were an infant. The spirit said, you can't stay. You're not done yet. I took off and drove on these winding roads to my log cabin, 80 miles an hour. He was driving. It wasn't me. I couldn't even stand. I couldn't even see. At a certain point, you have to give free will. I was determined on self-destruction. Destroy yourself if you must. This is the last time I can help you. The purpose of our life is...
We're live with today's guest, Louisa Peck. Louisa is a writer and an academic, but most importantly, she's someone that I think we can all relate to and we can all learn from. So today I'm looking forward to talking about all of your experiences, but mostly cherry picking all the lessons that myself, but also the audience can take from all of your experiences. So to start us off, Louisa, tell me a bit about your life growing up and what kind of an upbringing you've had.
Well, my parents were academics and they were great parents in several ways, but there were two big problems. One was that my dad was an alcoholic, an extremely high functioning one. He taught law, he wrote law articles, he could do everything, but he couldn't relax. So there was that kind of unacknowledged alcoholism that changed the family environment because he was so tense when he wasn't drinking. And then the other thing was they both put a lot of pressure on us to excel. And they both, especially my mother, believed that if you gave unconditional love, you would get mediocre children. So if you wanted them to excel, the best thing to do is withhold your love just a little bit and sort of say you're almost to where I can really, really love you. But if you could just do a little better, like it was just constantly getting a, what do you call that, performance review that was not great. And so that was my impression anyway. One of my siblings kind of shares it. So I just was excelling in every way I could, and it never felt like it was enough. So when I found alcohol, I was enough. When I found cocaine, I was more than enough. I was great. So these things didn't happen until after high school. High school was extremely painful for me. All I cared about was popularity because that was a performance review from my peers in my kind of half-formed mind. So I just felt like if I could be cool, if I could make people like me, then I would finally feel okay. And of course, because okayness has to come from within, you're never going to get it from people outside you. But I kept chasing it, and the only way I felt it on the inside was with the drugs. So after I graduated, I got all these awards, and I didn't really know what to do next. I graduated from Vassar College on the East Coast in the US. So I moved to New York City, and I thought that was the coolest place to live. And there were nightclubs where I could go and be cool. So that's kind of the setting for my NDE.
Brilliant. And I think there's so many things there that I can relate to, and that a lot of the people around me can relate to. The part about, your children needing to excel for them to be worthy of love, parents just looking for school results and good grades in order to validate you.
And validate themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. And especially then you move into high school, and that's again something that I relate to very much, where you need the validation of your peers. You're not cool by yourself. You're only cool if other people say you're cool. If you have this and that designer item, for instance. And tell me about where that has led in your early 20s. You were in New York City, you were being cool and I guess partying in all the right clubs, which is a fantasy for many teens.
It was sort of a fantasy thing. And I had never had a boyfriend in high school. I missed a lot of the dances. I asked someone to take me to the prom because I was perceived as a geek, an academic, high GPA and lousy conversation. And so in college, I had a boyfriend, but then he moved away. He was out of state. So while long story, he was kind of doing the same thing. I got a secret boyfriend. He kind of had a secret girlfriend. I found out later. So I'm trying to think what parts are relevant. I ended up breaking up with the distant one so that I could be with the secret one, but he had already broken up with me. And so I was kind of at a period between boyfriends. I was planning to get back the secret one, get him back. I mean, I had no doubt that I could. His best friend was a Coke dealer from college. And so I just asked him if he wanted to come out to New York City and we could go to a club together. And we were going to my favorite club, which was the Peppermint Lounge. And really, what we just planned, I think, to do a whole lot of cocaine and dance and have fun. That was the whole plan for the evening. I didn't really plan to get with him in any way because he was the best friend of my secret boyfriend.
And what happened that evening?
So we did a bunch of coke before we left. We did more coke when we got there, but we ran out. And so I did not want to come down. I was having a really good time. I was feeling good, but I could feel that the cocaine was wearing off. So we had some money with us and we put together $50. And we just started asking around, is there anyone selling cocaine? Is there anyone selling cocaine? And somebody pointed out someone to us and we approached him and he said he had a gram for sale. And we bought it and he vanished. As soon as we started doing it, we realized it was really, really bad. And in fact, it was not cocaine. I didn't know that until later when I got sober and I made friends with a lot of former coke dealers in AA and NA. And they told me they used to cut cocaine with lidocaine because it was cheaper. But judging from the fact that I got no high at all, it did numb our gums when we tested it that way, but it gave no high at all. So my date was more of a cocaine connoisseur than I was. He was like, this is nothing. It's doing nothing for me. And he threw down his straw. And my thinking was, it did numb our gums. It's got to be something. And if I do the whole pile, maybe I'll get a little bit high. So I just snorted the whole pile. And then I told him I was going to go use the bathroom. And on the way to the bathroom, I began to get symptoms of lidocaine poisoning, although I didn't know it. So lidocaine poisoning shuts down your autonomic nervous system. So that's your heart rate, your breathing, all the things that your body takes care of on its own, blood pressure and so on. And so I was seeing all of these speckles in my peripheral vision, which is normally what you see when you're going to faint. It just meant my brain was not getting enough oxygen. That got worse and worse when I was in the stall of the bathroom. That's when I remember that I was going almost blind. I could see this much and no more. And then I couldn't read any of the graffiti that was on the inside of the stall. And I knew it wasn't all illegible. There had to be some words there, but I also began to feel there was no air. I didn't realize my heart was beating slower and slower and slower, so that even when I breathed, not much would get to my brain. I thought there was no air, so I came out. I found my date and I was upset. I didn't know I was dying, but I said, there's no air in here. There's no air in here. And I was trying to take deep breaths, but there was nothing, no improvement from that. It was as if there was no oxygen. And he said, calm down, and took me to the bartender. The bartender gave me a glass of water and I didn't want it, but I took a sip, and that's when I left my body.
That's quite intense. Were you freaked out? Were you scared?
I was freaked out by the fact that nobody was acknowledging that there was no air. It's all relative to us. So it seems to me if I'm taking deep breaths, but I still have that oxygen starved feeling, there must be no oxygen. And it was a basement, this dance floor. And so I had the feeling that everybody had breathed up all the air. That was my thinking. And the idea that, no, you've been poisoned and you're dying, it was not on my radar.
Right. And what happened afterwards?
Well, from their perspective, it was horrible. From their perspective, I fell backwards. I had a grand mal seizure all over the floor and beat my head and beat my limbs and everything, and then had a cardiac arrest, and my heart and my breathing stopped. And the bartender had been trained in CPR, and that's why I'm here. He came out and did CPR for 3 minutes unsuccessfully before I came back. But from my perspective, it was a completely different experience. So from my perspective, my last thought was that I'd hit my chin on the bar because there seemed to be some kind of blow under my chin. And then it caused me to shoot up in the air. I was flying straight up, and I had a sense of Manhattan and everything just kind of receding away below me. And my thought was very simple. It was just, thank God that's over with that silly game I was playing down there. I'm so done with that. So I didn't even think I've died, I've left my body. I just was so ready to let go of this life as a lot of work and striving for no good reason. That's how I felt at the time. And I shot up in the air, and I was climbing up in this blue sky. And then beneath me was the huge ocean, and it was pure and blue. I didn't really remember breathing, but that sense of not having air was gone. I was kind of where I had wished most I could be. So anyway, I thought I could arch back and do a dive. So I tried it, and it worked. And I did a big swan dive backwards. And then I was diving toward the water, and it was approaching, and I had a thought, like, isn't it like concrete if you hit it from a high altitude? And I thought, well, we'll find out. I didn't feel any fear. And so I dove way down. I did a perfect dive way deep in the water. And then I could see the bubbles around me, and I could look up to the surface. It was a gorgeous dappled surface, just magical, magical. And I thought, it's awfully far away. I hope I can get there. And then the next thing I know, I'm surfacing. I can see the land, and it's quite distant, but there's a beach. And I think I want to be there. And the next thing I know, I'm waiting. There was maybe like half a second of swimming that I remember. And then I was waiting out on the beach, and I didn't question any of these, just wanting to be somewhere and then being there. It didn't seem that weird. So when I was on the beach, I looked down to my, I guess if I'm facing, it would be my left. And there was down the beach, there was a mesa, sort of like a sea stack. And it had this old weather-worn house on top, and saw the house, and I was like, oh, I know that house. That's got to do with me. I didn't know why it had to do with me. I'd never seen it before in my life, but that was my sense. I need to get there. So instead of getting to the house, I got to the base of the sea stack. And to my dismay, it was covered with this gross, putrid, green, slimy stuff that I thought, what is this? And I thought, is it rotten seaweed? And I just had a feeling it was so gross. Later, I would learn from hearing other NDEs that this is my toxicity. This is all my defenses and ego and things that I have created to cope. And I had to climb past them. So I just felt like, I'm strong, I can do this. And I started climbing. And it went well, but when I got to the house, I had lost my body. I had no more body. I was a point of intelligence and subjectivity about this far from the door sill. And my feeling about that was like, how inconvenient. Like, I didn't really... Again, I did not think it was weird, but I did think this was an impediment to what I wanted, which was to get in the house. And so again, I had that feeling, nothing's going to stop me. So I traveled, even with nobody, kind of like a subjective camera, very close to the floor. And I could see that the floorboards were super worn. So many people had walked there that they were old and almost kind of velvety, or almost how old wood gets when you can see the fiber of it. And I realized that's because all of us, and us was my ancestors going back, had passed through this same doorway and walked on those same boards. And so they were worn from that. And at the same time, I began to feel my ancestors as a presence just kind of around me, overjoyed to welcome me, anticipating welcoming me, wanting so much to be reunited with me. I need to say that some people care about their ancestors, and I did not care at all. I did not care at all in this life about my ancestors. Both of my parents came from dysfunctional families. The whole reason they moved to the west coast of Washington of the United States, to Washington State, was to get away from their families. And so I didn't know any cousins. I knew my grandparents a little, but I certainly did not care about them. And on the other side, I felt this immense honor, anticipation, excitement. I mean, think of the person you want to meet most. That's how I felt about the prospect of getting to see and be with my ancestors. There was supposed to be an armchair in the middle of that room. And I don't know what I mean supposed to be, but I had that thought that, where is the chair? And the chair was where all my ancestors sat and contemplated the beauty of the ocean view through this big picture window facing the ocean. And I thought, this is no fair. The chair's not there, and I'm so little. How am I going to see the ocean I want to see? And as soon as I thought, I want to see, something else took over control and pulled me. It felt like being pulled by my sternum, by my heart, even though I had no physical body. But the sensation was as some magnet were pulling you by the heart, and it pulled me over the floor. And I was going, whoa, this is crazy. It felt really good, I also have to say. And then up, and then over the windowsill, and then I was flying over the ocean, and the sun was setting in front of me. And so there was a golden path that came toward me, and I was zooming over that path, and I was zipping along at this amazing speed. And the feeling of zooming through space, I have also heard other NDEers trying to describe this. It just felt wonderful. I have theories about what was actually happening then, but I'll just stick to the narrative as I experienced it. I had a thought, wait a second, I kind of remembered this life here on Earth, and I thought, people can't fly. Is this a dream? Is this real? And a voice answered me, and it was like, choom. It answered me in my bones, like so resonant and powerful. And it said, more real than anything back there, meaning in that life as Louisa. And I was very surprised to be answered, because I had thought I was alone. But I also recognized that it was right, that this was, in fact, more real than anything I experienced through my senses back on Earth or back in my body. So the sun got bigger and bigger. And again, I began to have a little bit of sense of like, am I going to vaporize? Am I going to burn up? Because I can see the corona moving on that sun, and I know it's going to burn me up. And I didn't feel fear though. And then as I got bigger and bigger, and then I went through a filament, and I was inside it. And in the sun was the light, and the light was all around me. And it was this delicious warmth, except that it penetrated my being, my consciousness, not just a physical sensation of warmth, but the warmth that is love, that is everything good. I was absolutely saturated with it, and it felt amazing. And my sense was, finally, because all my life to that age of 22, I had been struggling and struggling to feel I was enough, to feel I was lovable, to feel that I was good in the light. All of that was fulfilled and more. I felt precious. Then I became aware of a being that I couldn't see. All I could see was the light. But I knew the being was holding me as if I were an infant. I had a sense that the being was sitting cross-legged and holding me as an infant and pouring love into me. You are so loved. You are so loved. And it wasn't really like, I love you. It was just like, this love is for you. And it was for me specifically. It was not just for whoever shows up here. It was someone who knew me better than I knew myself. And I loved the parent, and it was just the apex experience of anything I can ever imagine. And then the spirit said, you can't stay. You're not done yet. And I understood you can't stay. I didn't know what the heck was talking about. You're not done yet. And then boom, the light was gone and I was in blackness. And I was just not having it. I got so angry and I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw a tantrum and make the parents see that I had to stay in the light. But I got a little signal back that just said, case closed, honey. And then I felt like I was falling. And that was a horrible feeling. As delicious as it had felt to fly through the air, this was the opposite. This was descending, dropping in blackness. And I was scared for just a little bit. And then I began to see these weird chalk figures on the blackness. And they were little figures, stick figures, doing little dances and swinging on swing sets. And they had a little chalk teeter-totter that they were going on. And they had these high, chipper little voices. And they were saying nonsense little things like, how many hippos make a flim-flam? Or how many, I don't know, zebras in hopscotch. They were all children's things. And I felt like, okay, this is nothing compared to the light. But I feel like the parent gave me this to keep me entertained until I can go back, because I know I'm going back. I kind of decided to hang out like when you watch cartoons when you're a kid, and I was just going to hang out there. But then one of the stick figures got closer and his head kind of filled in like a dinner plate and took up a lot of my vision. So I was trying to see around him, and he was not having fun. He was saying, how many fingers? What is your name? And then I remembered this life, and I was absolutely devastated to realize I was back in the meat puppet. And that was how I thought of it. I just felt like I can't do this again. This is just so primitive. I just have I can't go back to that after having been where I've been. But I did answer him, and I was lying on the ground and I was in a pool of sweat, and he was the bartender. So that brings us full circle.
So then you're coming back to your body, and there's a few things I want to pause and talk about. First of all, I have no words. It's so impressive, everything you felt, everything you've went through. Just absolutely amazing. You've mentioned while you were telling the story that you do have theories for how you would explain what happened and what that signified. What was the significance of what happened and of that journey?
Well, this is just based on, I've conducted a lot of interviews with other NDEers, and I've gone to hear a lot of us speak. The initial blow is that it's often kind of a surprising experience to leave the body or to re-enter the body. So I think I was going through the elements. I went through air, water, earth, wood, fire played prominent roles until I got finally to the sun. And why it felt so good zooming across then was he was bringing me to a higher vibration. I don't really know what that means, except that there are base vibrations of evil, cruelty, darkness, and there are higher vibrations of love and compassion and connection. And that's where he was. I call him he now. The voice that was with me, the one who answered me, more real, and the one who was with me in the sun, he was bringing me to that higher vibration. And then the bartender created a means for me to get back in my body. And so it was decided. And I feel like in my view of the universe, God, my angel, and I are in a kind of lineage. And the decision was made, send her back. And so I was sent back. The anger that I felt was, I believe we are each of us individuated by a kind of aura or film or membrane of anger and fear that makes it so that we're not picking up spirit energies constantly. They're rebuffed. This is what makes us an individual cell, just like you need a hydrophobic membrane to make a physical cell in the body, because otherwise it would just all be awash in the water of the body. And my energy is enclosed by this sheath of anger and fear. And so when I dropped in the darkness, that was lowering my vibration, which feels terrible and is what it feels like to go to hell. But I was just going back to this plane, entering my body. I don't have any memory of entering my body other than that anger. And I may have already been kind of in my body at the time that I was seeing the stick figures. I don't know. That's my thought.
Got it. And one thing that I've noticed whilst you were telling your story is when we were talking about you growing up, it was a lot of, feeling not good enough, feeling unlovable, feeling almost that being good enough or being lovable is conditioned by being popular, by having a certain status, by achieving perhaps good grades or doing well in school. All of a sudden, what seemed to me like this chase to be acknowledged, to be validated as a human being, to be accepted as good enough. You have this experience where from where I'm sitting, it's just there's no fear, everything is beautiful, and you feel accepted, you feel whole, you feel good enough, pretty much. You feel validated and you feel loved. So I don't hear any feelings of fear, any feelings of angst, except for that small part at the end when you're coming back to your body. So my question is, judging by the feelings you've had in your life up until then, and then having this experience, were you not disappointed to be back to your life?
I was terribly disappointed. There were really like two stages. As soon as I was out of my body, as soon as I was flying upward above the ocean, I was rid of those insecurities. I was rid of the need. That's why I had that sense like I can climb, I'm strong, or I can do a back bend. I had confidence, and my fear was all gone, because the purpose of fear is to keep us in our bodies. And you don't need it once you're on the other side, because you're not in your body anymore. So there is no fear on the other side. And then the second stage was being in the light, when I was unifying at some level with God. I did not unify all the way. I was sent back, obviously, but I was beginning to feel how it feels to pass through into what people call heaven.
Amazing. So then you're back into your body. The bartender thankfully saved your life. Mm-hmm. What happened then?
Well, I'll just tell it in accelerated form. Everybody said we're going upstairs. I found that, I don't know if it was from brain damage or what, but I have heard this from other NDEers as well. When I came back, my persona, my outlook, my experiences was just like me at 5 years old. So I had the sense that a big deal had happened. And I also understood that they didn't know, the people here didn't know anything about this. I felt like a magic portal that I had gone through. And they were going on something really bad that happened here, but I didn't really know what that was. There was a huge crowd of people staring at me. I didn't know what they wanted. And so we all just started going upstairs, but I was just kind of giggly. I just thought, this is silly. I don't know. I didn't have any of my normal feelings of that I would have with a whole bunch of people staring at me, and it didn't really make sense to me. I didn't really know that I had died until we were outside and we were sitting on a bench with our backs to the wall of the building waiting for the ambulance. I didn't know that either. People had called 911. I was smoking a cigarette and being cool. And then the bartender came over and he started talking to my date. And he said, the date said that he had actually told him to stop CPR because it wasn't working and because he couldn't stand to look at the corpse. It was a very violent thing, I guess. And then the bartender said to me, "You were gone for 3 minutes." And I kind of put together that he had done CPR, but instead of feeling grateful, 22-year-old Louisa felt like, "Oh my God, he had his mouth on my mouth. That's so embarrassing. Oh my God, he's like 30 and bald. That's so weird." Like I just had those thoughts. And I didn't thank the man who saved my life, who gave me these last 42 years of living. I didn't thank him.
It's just so unbelievable.
Well,
you come back and it's exactly, being back into the body of the 22-year-old girl. I can
wiser.
Yeah, not that cute.
But also, as soon as I asked my date, what are we doing? He said, we're waiting for the ambulance. And I was like, okay, cool. And then I got this really bad feeling and I just said, who is it for? And he said, it's for you. You were dead. And I thought of my parents finding out that I had been doing cocaine. I thought of my parents finding out that I'd had this thing happen to me, and I hated hospitals really with a passion, and I just didn't want to go. So I just said to him, I don't want to go. Don't make me go. Don't make me go. And he had been in a little trouble at college for dealing drugs, and he was a private school math teacher. He did not want to get in more trouble. So there was a whole line of taxis right in front of us. He just grabbed my hand and he pulled me and we jumped in a cab and it drove away, and people banged all over the trunk saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? And we just drove. And I again thought it was a fun and silly game.
What was your life after that experience like?
So the initial thing is trying to decide what this thing that happened to me was. And it's important to realize this was 1982. The first book ever written on near-death experience when the term was coined was, I believe, 1978. And I had certainly never heard of it. No one I knew had ever heard of a near-death experience. So I didn't have that word to assign to what had happened to me. I only knew the words hallucination, and I thought that I had been taking cocaine. But then I had this time of reckoning when I was alone in my room the next afternoon. I already knew I had some brain damage. I knew I had bruises all over the back of my head, all over my hands and elbows and everything. I knew I had died, and I remembered all of these things when the voice answered me and in the light, and I knew it wasn't a hallucination. But the only words I had for it was God and religion and church and things that, I'm a little 22-year-old who likes to be cool and badass and run around to parties and smoke cigarettes and drink. And the idea of saying there is a God would mean I can't keep doing all that. And the whole sort of profundity of the idea that I died and was given my life back again because I wasn't done was just too much of a responsibility. And I thought, if I can just find a way to explain this away, I can be free and go back to being me the way I was. If it's true, I have to go to church and transform everything about me and everything I believe and lose being who I am. And so I thought of the computer Hal in 2001. If you've seen that movie, he gets slowly shut down and he reverts to his very first program, which was to sing this little song, Daisy, Daisy, which he sings. And I thought, what if my Daisy was love? What if as my brain shut down from not getting oxygen because I had this cardiac arrest, what if the last thought was love, and that was why it felt so huge? And it didn't really parse because then who was talking to me? And if I loved it so much, why would I kick myself out? And I just said, okay, I can't think about those things. I'm just going to go with that. It was hypoxia and hallucination and pretend it's a done deal.
I can also imagine none of your friends, as you said, there were no books about it, none available to you at the time. So there must have been, but you probably didn't go to a library to check. So there was no way of knowing, that this had happened to other people at any point in time, and there's no frame of reference. Did you share with anyone, with the boyfriend at the time, or with any of the friends?
I shared with different boyfriends and my sister and my roommate. And that's kind of about as far as I went with it, because everybody was agreeing it was a fantastic, fabulous, very elaborate hallucination, because I remembered everything, but not one person said to me, hey, have you heard of Raymond Moody's book? Hey, do you know there's these things called near-death experiences? The first so I had put it away, and my first paranormal experience, what happened is that sheath that I talk about, in exiting it and coming back through it, I had damaged it. That's my theory. No one knows exactly why people after NDE experiences have paranormal after effects. Bruce Grayson, who wrote the book After, he thinks it's something in the brain that gets changed. I think it's something in the aura that gets changed, because while I got depressed. I had to leave Manhattan. I was having panic attacks. I was a mess. And this thing that had happened was no help to me at all, which is very different than most near-death experiencers who are usually transformed by what happened. But in my case, because I'd shoved it away, I saw a ghost on a beach, and it was clearly a ghost. I tell the whole story in my book, but just briefly, he was dressed like an old-fashioned fisherman. I like to say the guy on the fish sticks package. And I crossed paths with him after having seen him for some time, and he didn't answer me when I said, how's it going? So after I went on a few steps, I looked back and he was gone. And further, he had left no tracks. So that happened. And then I had foreknowledge that my nephew was going to die. I moved away from Seattle and bought a cabin in the country, thinking I was going to be happier living in the country. But what actually happened was kind of the added isolation and my drinking. And I got a job as a barista at a very cool espresso shop where everybody drank a lot. So the drinking just started to spiral out of control. And I reached a point where I wanted to die. And I thought, I just can't keep doing this. I can't keep doing this life. I'm not getting anywhere. It's constant struggle. And my parents have 3 other kids, and they'll be okay. And I just want out. That's where I was when my angel made his executive decision, which I can tell you about.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
So I was going to parties all the time and staying out very late and getting drunk. And one time I got so drunk that people took away my keys, but they took me to another house and told me to sleep in this bed. But I woke up and I staggered over and found my keys, and I got in my car. I could not find the ignition for a long time, but eventually I found it, and I took off and drove on these winding roads to my log cabin, 80 miles an hour, and seeing triple, quadruple. And I came to overpass over railroad tracks where there's a narrow bridge, and there were all these signs with reflectors to mark the narrow. And there weren't all these. There was a reflector sign. And in my vision, there were a whole bunch of them because I was seeing triple or whatever. And I just thought, I don't care if I die. And I just kind of aimed for the middle and shot through at 80 miles an hour. And I got through, and I was like, woohoo! And I got back to my log cabin, and I got out of the car, and I was using the car door to hold myself up because I couldn't stand. And I thought, I am such a badass when I drive drunk. By this time, I am ashamed to say I'm 34 years old. And that was my thought. And this is when the voice, which I sort of knew was the same one that I had met on the other side, shot through me. It just shot through me. The sky was all starry up above, and it was dark and cold, and it went through like a bolt of lightning, and it was a message, and it kind of unpacked itself. The first thing it said was, "This is the last time I can help you." And there was a sternness in that. There was a like, if you want to go smash your brains on a telephone pole, go do it. You're free. I'm not going to stop it. And then the second part was, you do know right from wrong. Because I'd been like reading a lot of this book, Bukowski, this poet Bukowski, kind of nihilistic stuff. And I had been scrawling in my journal. Your spirits can read your journals. There is no right and wrong. It's just a human construct and nothing matters. And so he said, you do know right from wrong. And that was super clear memories. Now, remember, I am blacked out drunk, right? So when I got up in the morning, somebody had made oatmeal and spilled it all over the place and left the milk out on the counter. And that was me. The last memory I had was that message going through me and that going across the bridge. So weird thing about spiritual memories is they do not fade. So I did not understand why all these years later, at 34, 12 years later, I could remember the NDE as if it happened yesterday. And that I could remember this drive and this overpass and this moment with perfect clarity when everything else was mush. From the party itself, I can just remember that whenever I would fall down, everybody would go, whoa. And I remember them taking me to this house, how we got it. So in other words, from the time the angel started taking care of me to the time when he let go is super clear in my memory all these years later.
And do you feel like this guiding force had something to do with, you being able to drive through those winding roads?
He was driving. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. I couldn't even stand. I couldn't even see. But he had sent me back and he wanted, there's stuff I was supposed to do. And then he was so, I just want to say, he just, at a certain point, you have to give free will to beings. So if I was determined on self-destruction, at that point, he was like, destroy yourself if you must. But I will say he was a little pissed. And I say he, and I guess I should spill the beans that as the years passed and I began to answer him and talk to him, I eventually developed a name for him. I was very much a feminist and I wanted the voice, the parent, to be female, but it began to become increasingly clear to me that he is masculine. So I call him Ignacio now because during the pandemic, I had a lot of time with just him and me. And I just kept nagging him to give me a name. I said, I don't like calling you Angel. I don't even really like the word angel. So please just give me something. And so one day he answered and he kind of rolls his eyes sometimes. He went, I have had so many names in so many lifetimes, and none of them are in alphabets that you know. And so I was kind of like, whoa, I didn't think of that. So I, again, was still whining and I was just give me one, just give me anything. And so he showed me things that were sort of letters floating in space and they were moving around as I guessed. There was an IG and I was like, Ig, I don't know what Ig. And finally, I arrived at Ignacio and then he put an E below it. And so I was like, Ignacio? And then you get the thing, just like in charades, So then I looked it up and it means born of fire in Etruscan. And I guess that was probably one of his last lives. I've called mediums before. I wanted to do a past life regression and I called this medium in California and she goes, no, I don't do them remotely. I don't believe in doing them over Zoom. I'm sure you can. Who's that with you? Oh my God, he's so powerful. And she said he was super masculine too. So she said he was old. And that's what she was getting. And I hadn't even said a word, about that. So what I can tell you, I'll kind of speed up my story. So just because he's told me that I do know right from wrong, it's a long way to start building that. I tried to keep drinking and I couldn't do it anymore because his words just kept ringing in my mind. I did still want to kill myself. And I finally made up my mind, okay, I'm going to call this AA number that someone gave me because they clearly thought I needed it, Alcoholics Anonymous. And if I don't like what I hear from them, I'm going to drink a gallon of vodka and die. So I called AA, and the woman was super sweet and nice. And I went to my first AA meeting. But I still in my head had the same set of values. So I was going to go to this vodka slamming party where this boy that I was obsessed with was going to be. And what happened was I left the gate to my log cabin open, and one of my dogs was killed by a dirt truck, ran over her. And while I was next to her body, he showed me her blood going through the asphalt. And he gave me this knowing, he was like, this is what happens, and this will be your blood soon if you don't cut the shit. And then he showed me a very old image of like a Pied Piper with a bunch of people following. That was coolness. It was coolness. And he showed me he was leading us all to a cliff and to our deaths. And he said, don't follow him anymore. And I remember I was by my dog's dead body. So I had cut the shit for a moment. I was my real, authentic, grieving self just for a moment. And I said to him, I don't know what else to live for than that. And he answered, there is something and you'll learn. Because I didn't know anything about loving other people. I didn't know anything about trying to be useful or give to people or just how to love from one's heart to others. I knew nothing about that. I knew only how to suck it in. And he was saying, we're going to reverse this flow. I didn't know that then. I knew I just had to let go of it. So I called the one person I knew who was sober, and she came over, and we ended up starting a relationship, a lesbian relationship. I had already been lesbian for the previous relationship, and I've been sober 39 years. No, 29, sorry, at the end of this month. He's spoken to me many, many more times that I can tell you about if you like. I have lots of stories of his intervention.
Sure. I think first, I'd just like to say, Louisa, it's so unbelievable how courageous you are to share your story with the good, the less good as well, because I think the feelings that you've had that have led to alcohol, that have led to substance abuse, I was going through your blog and I was thinking, well, I've had those feelings many times. Everybody I know has had those feelings. And I think perhaps there's a variance in some people have it more often and perhaps all of the time. And for others, maybe it's just parts of the time. But I think you speaking to your past self and the decisions that you had made back then, I think it's just awe-inspiring, and that you can still come back from that and be, the person I see today is just this lovely, joyful, wonderful, light person with this beautiful light energy around you, from what I can tell. And it's just a lot of compliments to you for
Thank you.
Turning that around and becoming the person that you are today, because I can imagine that was definitely not easy, even with the guidance, even with receiving this otherworldly help. I can imagine the road was still painful and hard and difficult.
There were moments of decision on my part. This is not really a paranormal story, but it is one of my favorite ones to tell, is that I still had this problem with being obsessed. So years later, I'd been in that relationship. I'd stayed sober, but she had left me for someone else, and I'd become obsessed with this man in AA. I would be chasing him all over the place, and I remember after a meeting, I got him to say he'd go to a restaurant with me. So I was thinking, oh, great, we'll go to the restaurant and then he'll fall in love with me and I'll seduce him and it's going to be wonderful. But when we got to the restaurant, other people from the AA meeting we'd been at came in, and he had also asked some people on our way there to join us. So every time someone would come in the door, he'd say, come sit with us. And I'd go, damn it, and till finally there was a huge table of us. And I started talking to the people with me. And at a certain point, I realized that he, the guy I was obsessed with, had gone to a different table a long time ago. And I hadn't even noticed. I was so having fun with the people that I was with. In my old system of values, he had the validation that I needed. And in my new system of values, mixing with people, give and take, having fun together was more worthy than that. But I was still stuck in my old rut. So when I left the restaurant, it was raining outside, and I stood outside and I could see the lights reflecting in the puddles. And it was just a kind of a moment. And I said, I didn't call him Ignacio then, I called him Angel. And I said, Angel, I don't want my love to be a fire hose. I want it to be a sprinkler, a fountain for everybody. And what can I do for you to help me with that? And he said, every time you're at an AA meeting and someone annoys you, I want you to go up to them. I want you to introduce yourself, and I want you to learn 3 things about them. And so I did it for a year. If I was in an A meeting and somebody talked in a way that I thought was too showy, I'd be like, oh, God, she's showing off. And I'd be like, I have to go learn 3 things. And somebody would do a share that sounded to me kind of rehearsed, like they had kind of planned out everything they were going to say. And I call that a car share, because you practiced it in the car. And I'd go, oh, I have to go learn 3 things. And I did this again and again and again until 2 things happened. The first is that I had a million friends. I had so many friends, because each one of those little connections would grow when I'd see them again. And many of the women who annoyed me because they were like me. And so they would ask me to be their AA sponsor and meet with them and help them through the 12 steps. The other thing that happened is that gradually I just stopped being annoyed by anything anybody did or said, because I don't know if it was operant conditioning that I didn't want to have to go ask them 3 things, or if it was just that I learned that I am like everyone else because I was a changed person. And I'll tell you one other story is that when I was turning 18 years sober, which is, gosh, already more than 10 years ago, I was going through a terrible time when I had written my addiction memoir. And my family hated it, especially that I said our dad was an alcoholic, and just they didn't understand the concept of an addiction memoir, which is to show how you hit bottom and then how you clawed your way back. They thought I was showing off with all these terrible things. So I was having an 18-year sober party and inviting these jillions of friends that I now had, but then I found out I had breast cancer. And just about a week before the party, I found out the breast cancer was contained to a tumor, and I was going to have a lumpectomy rather than a mastectomy. And so I went on Facebook, changed my party to a get to keep my boob party. And all these, who can resist coming to a get to keep my boob party? All these people came, and they made a poster on the wall that said, Louisa beat cancer. And I didn't have to do the cooking. People cooked, people brought things. All these people from Alcoholics Anonymous that I had helped in little ways over the years. And when they were singing to me, I was embarrassed, the way you get embarrassed when people are singing happy birthday. And I got visited by all that less than stuff. And I thought, oh, my siblings are right. I suck. I've made myself the center of attention yet again. And Ignacio came to me, my angel came to me then. And he said, this is the whole point of life. Just let them love you. And it was so hard because imagine being in the midst of like, I am ripping on myself, I am beating myself up. And he says, just let them love you. So you have to go and turn it around and open your heart and just look at their faces with love and feel it that way instead of as embarrassment. And there were two pictures of me taken at that time with two different cameras in two different moments by two different people, and they both show an orb to my left, and it rises. It's right by my temple, and then it rises away, and that was his energy.
That's amazing. And one thing that this brings me to is there's this shift in you, right? From feeling not worthy, not good enough, and not lovable, to understanding that the purpose of life is being loved, letting yourself feel loved, which
Mm-hmm.
almost, I'm not a psychotherapist, but briefly mentioning your relationships, it almost sounds like you were chasing people that were maybe a bit unavailable because you were perhaps used to working to be loved. You had to work
Mm-hmm.
in order to be deserving of
So,
the love you.
yeah, the only exception is the woman that I got sober with, but other than that, it fits the pattern.
And then all of a sudden you understand, you are worthy because of who you are. You don't need to work for it. You don't need to do anything else. What was the frame shift? How did you switch from not being good enough, having to work for everything, to I am lovable as I am enough as I am? I think, just to bring it back, I think that's something that a lot of us struggle with. I don't know anybody that hasn't struggled with that. I think perhaps many people are not very open about it because they'll just parade their accolades. And whenever I see that, I go like, ooh, you feel like you're not enough. Okay, I get that. But I think that's one of the healthiest things we can do for ourselves. So,
Mhm.
what was the frame shift for you?
Well, it was this morning because every morning I default back to not worthy. That is my, I guess you could say that the way my parents imprinted me. So starting every morning, I have to wake up and let that go. And I have to trust my higher power that I'm here for a reason. And I just have to, I don't meditate every day. The one thing that I do every day though is this little girl here, Alice. Oops, I'm pointing the wrong way. Alice. She's a rescue dog who was so badly beaten in Texas that she was just terrified of absolutely everything, and she was thrown as a puppy into the Rio Grande desert to starve, and she did starve, and so she can't see very well, and you can see she has that nervous tick that where she's moving, and she has almost no teeth, no canines, just these little yellow things in where her teeth should be. And I saved her, and every morning I would do this thing because she was terrified of me too. I would make her get in my lap, and I would say, you are safe and I love you. And I would just beam that to her. So she wants that every morning. She still does. So in the morning, when she comes and sits in front of me and I let her get on my lap and I hug her and tell her she's safe and I love her and I will always take care of her, I'm also saying it to myself. I am safe and I love me and I will take care of me. And I know Ignacio is there with the same feeling, and I will be okay. It doesn't mean that life is going to be real like skippy go lucky. In July, my ex-boyfriend, who I still loved though he had started being unfaithful, when he relapsed alcoholically, he died of alcoholism. Just got a ulcer, or what do you call it? Gastric hemorrhage, and died alone in his house on his 60th birthday. I still loved him, and it's tragic. Then my mother died in August, and then I've had two more friends die in the past 2 weeks. One just died from some kind of heart failure, and another relapsed. I mean, I've lost a lot of people, but this is just recently. And I know that they're okay, but it's especially when your mom dies, and especially when the person that, you would call the love of your life dies, there's this discombobulation. Because with Gerard, no one remembers all the amazing things we did together except me. Although he did come to me once. There's my Alice. He came to me after death, and he told me how much he regretted what he had done. And he asked if he could come to me in my dreams. And he did come to me in my dreams and explained a lot of how it felt to be him in that relationship. And my mother, when she died, she just was out of here. She said only one thing to me after she had died. While she was dying, she did tell me, my sister's here, and her sister had died 5 years before her. So she was really happy. She was like, my sister's here. And she never believed any of my NDE stuff. She always said, psh, psh. But then she knew her sister was there. And after she died, she just said, I should have done this a long time ago, because she was 97 when she died. Not having a mother and having lost that love, I'm a little disoriented. Ignacio also told me that I need to move. I need to sell this house where I've lived for 23 years. And I need to go to the Oregon coast, and I need to start a sanctuary for other animals, what I've done for Alice. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm scared because I don't know where I'm supposed to go in Oregon. But how's it going to work, Ignacio? And what he keeps telling me is just have faith, take the next step, and I will show you more as we go. So I'm blind faith. I'm going to do what he told me to do.
I think that's amazing. And to be honest, the purpose of opening an animal shelter, I think that's a beautiful purpose to have. There's always so much pain, when, at least for me, when I hear about animals being mistreated, because they can't really defend themselves. I think we can perhaps do it better by talking, by asking for help, but often enough, a dog or a cat, they just fend for themselves.
She has PTSD really badly. She basically, every time my son approaches her, she sees a big man, and she used to pee out of just terror. And it's still scary for her. I believe the spirits in animals are as much of God as we are, that they chose to incarnate as an animal. When I'm helping Alice feel okay and safe and all the things she knows she is now, I'm helping spirit. I'm putting more good in the world.
Yeah, exactly. Louisa, it's just been amazing talking to you. I wanted to shift gears a little bit here and ask, you've written 2 books.
Yes.
You've written A Spiritual Evolution, and you've written Die-Hard Atheist, from NDE denier to full-on woo-woo against my will.
So
Very interesting title.
This is my new book, which I would love to plug. Yeah.
Go for it.
So this really just goes from paranormal event to paranormal event. And it sort of fills in where I was in my life at the time when this paranormal event happened. So you do get the story of my life, but I very much consolidate anything that is just part of my alcoholism or part of whatever the rest of my life. And it's doing really well. I would strongly recommend this one. And then this other book, which I'm using to prop up my laptop to make it a little higher, is this is The Spiritual Evolution. This is super long book. You don't want to get it unless you want to read a whole lot. It's got entries from my journal. It's basically, in AA, we have speaker meetings sometimes where somebody gets up and tells their story. So imagine if somebody took 10 hours to do that. If you like that, some people have said, I love the book and I was so sad when I finished. And, because they said it was like taking an AA meeting, a recovery meeting with them, NA or AA or OA or whatever they're recovering from everywhere they went. So they're different. But I would say probably start with the Die-Hard Atheist, and then if you want to hear more, you can buy the other one.
And tell me this, why is it important that messages like the ones that you have in your books, why is it important for you to share them? And why is it important for people to read them?
I think the most important shift is that the more I was trying to get happiness from outside me, the more I languished. And the more I began to realize what I do have now is I have a constant, it might sound annoying, but a constant friendliness and a constant goodwill and a constant kind of silent blessing for every person that I encounter. And I love it when people smile back to me or when they speak back to me, but I am going to go around being friendly all the time because ultimately I don't think that I was sent back to do some great thing. I think that the purpose of our life is to manifest love and make more love in that way. One NDEer that I interviewed, I loved what her higher power said to her was, what matters is the wake that you leave behind you. And she was given sort of the image of a duck on the water leaving a wake, and said, are people happier and do they feel better about themselves and their life for having crossed paths with you, or do they feel worse? And when I meet people who are so cold, Seattle is there's this thing called the Seattle freeze. When I was young, people were very kind, but sometimes I will try to speak to people and it's as if we're on the subway or something, even though we're on the sidewalk or in the store, and they're just like, why are you talking to me? They're missing the point of life, which is even in little increments to love and be loved, even in the tiniest sparks. And research is showing this now, right? Research is showing that it's not just the big relationships in your life that make you healthy. It's all the little ones that you have with every person that you cross paths with. And why is it good for us? Because that's what we're here to do, is to connect and make little sparks of love everywhere we go.
And I couldn't agree with you more. That's also one revelation that I've had in the past few years. I've been thinking, I think growing up, to just give you a bit of a background, my idea was always I worked in a big corporation. So my dream from, being young was going to school, going to college, get a good degrees, go to a big corporation, and then climb up the corporate ladder. So that was my nirvana. I thought CEO would be just awesome. In the pursuit of being powerful or being the person that people would listen to or get things done, I realized I don't want to be that person. And I realized I would much rather be somebody that made other people feel good in my presence. And I felt most rewarded when I was somebody that was nice, that was friendly, when I would get feedback, that complimented, oh, I felt so good talking to you, or I'm able to open up to you. And that just sort of reinforced that personality trait that I don't want to be known as the person that will get anything done, regardless what it takes. Mm-hmm. I just want to be a good human being and be a good presence and make other people feel loved and seen in my presence, mm-hmm. for as long as it is. That shift has been very rewarding. I sometimes, as you say, with feeling unlovable or not good enough, it's something you have to go through almost daily. And there's times when at least for me, I get out of that feeling, and when I have to think that I have to get back in. But it's absolutely, I think those micro connections, I call them micro connections, and I call them energies of love, because I think you can have love for everybody around you, for friends, for family. It doesn't just have to be the romantic partner in your life.
Mm-hmm, yes. And from the things that you said, even before we started recording, I can tell that you are just devoting your energy to help others. And you don't really care who those others are, right? It's just whoever needs to see this video and get these messages, that's who you are working for.
If there's even one person, that's something that's been said a lot, if there's one person that maybe makes a better decision because of this one video, I think both you and I have done a lot
Exactly.
for them.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And just to round up the part about your books, what I wanted to read was a small part of one of the reviews that I found on Amazon, because I think this one review really embodies most of the reviews that I've read. And I think it really speaks to your story and to your books. So I'll keep it short, but I'll read the end of it. It helped me empathize with not only her life experiences and personal struggles, but also those of people that I know and love who have gone through similar things. And I have to say, the recurring theme that I've seen in the reviews of your books were people that have maybe not gone through the same challenges that you have, but that have a newfound understanding and love and compassion for those who have. And this is only possible, in my view, because of how raw and honest you've exposed your story out there, which I can imagine is very frightening to do when you're writing it, because you have no idea
It
of
could
the.
not be any more honest. It is honest, honest, honest. I admit stuff that, like, yeah, it's you remember how I told you about how I had those shallow thoughts after the bartender did CPR? That's not the only time I had shallow, selfish thoughts, right? So I am really honest about all of them, because when I started writing the addiction memoir, again, I was guided by Ignacio to say that we experience life in this way. It's not just I may have developed some weird quirks in my ways of developing, and other people might not be alcoholic, or they might not get obsessions, but they have something that they're doing also as a sort of what's called false refuge in Buddhism, to feel better, which ultimately doesn't serve them or anyone else. And so it's only by total honesty that you can get this recognition of, oh, we're all human and we all have these pains, and what's the constructive way that we can address them.
And what I would like to end with, I have to say that the part of your story that struck a chord with me most is coming back to the feeling unlovable, feeling not good enough. It's something that, beyond the fact that I think everybody has struggled with, I have struggled with many times. It's something that I have to go through every time and remind myself I am worthy. Validation is not outside of me, it is within me. But it's a process. And I think some days you're higher up that mountain, and other days you're just a bit lower. And from experiencing life, I think that's exactly as it should be. There's no destination, there's no level where you've unlocked it and awesome, you've gotten it. But what would you say to somebody that is maybe feeling the way you were in your teens? If you could talk to 20-year-old Louisa before the NDE, that was chasing popularity, that was chasing being cool, and would do, one or the other thing that would make her cool in pursuit of this goal, what would you say to those people?
Well, I think one of the things, this isn't quite what I'd say, but to befriend your inner critic. So it's like when my inner critic, sometimes I'll go for a hike by myself and I'll be hiking along, and then my inner critic will say, you know why you're alone? It's because nobody likes you. You don't really have any friends because you're essentially boring. And so you're going to just be alone always. And then I'll say, really? Is that the best you can do? That's the same thing you've been saying since high school.
Okay.
So then it's kind of like you can personify the voices in your head, and you can realize that self-criticism is in its own twisted way trying to protect you. It's always trying to say the worst thing about you first so that you won't get sucker punched, so that you have faced that already. But it's not a strategy that works. So you just have to tell it, I know you're trying to help me, but please be quiet, or I'm not listening to you. As for the teenager me, gosh, I don't think I could have learned what I've learned without walking every step that I've walked. I just feel like every pain and heartbreak that I've gone through has shown me more, that's made me more compassionate towards others. I was not given the love that I needed, so I was a drowning swimmer. And when you approach a drowning swimmer, all they're going to do is claw at you and try to hang on to you and try to save themselves. And that's how I was living. And for me to learn that I can propel myself and stay afloat by myself it's been my life's work. So I guess what I would say to the young people who are hurting is just have faith and grow from everything that life puts in your path because it has something to teach you.
That's beautiful. And sometimes, it's even just getting off the couch or taking the first step. Those can be monumental wins.
They are, but I just want to say surround yourself with people who support you, even when you're doing your stuff. I mean, Alice is still terrified all the time, but or you never know when she's going to go into PTSD. Where is she again? Yeah, you just never know when you're going to do that, do you, honey? But I accept her as she is. And I had to end a friendship recently because the person I always felt bad when I was with them. And you have to listen to that. Surround yourself with good people.
That's great advice. And I can definitely recognize that, being around people that you just don't feel good with. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Louisa, thank you so much for our chat today. It could have easily gone on for more hours. There were so many questions that we didn't get to go through, but I think you've been an open book. You've been so raw and honest with your experience, with your challenges in life, which is something that I very much appreciate, because I think all of us go through different challenges, but I think most people just keep it to themselves because they're afraid, because they're maybe ashamed. And I think by being open and transparent, this is the way that other people can learn from us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed talking with
you. How can people connect with you and with your work?
Well, we'll put it on the podcast page, right? But both the books are on Amazon. The addiction memoir is under the name Louisa P because I'm not supposed to have a last name if it's about recovery. So that's by Louisa P. And the Die Hard Atheist, which is the one I would say to start with, is by Louisa Peck. It's on Amazon. That's the only place you can get it right now is on Amazon. And then I have a blog that is one word, spiritualevolution.net. And that's where I post. I don't post as often as I used to, but I try to post at least once a month. And there's years and years and years of blogs in there. So people can find that as well.
Beautiful. And I would definitely recommend the latest blog post that you've written. I've definitely taken some notes from that one.
I'm glad.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Louisa, for being here today.
Thank you.